Well, it looks like the President of the United States is having one of its fiercest battles with sand.
He's playing. President, what are you going to say to Trump on Wednesday?
This as a lot of liberals are acting like they already have sand in their you-know-what, as Joe Biden, by the way, has spent nearly 560 days of his administration on vacation. That is 40.3% of his presidency at the beach. As the Babylon Bee had a very interesting article titled Biden to Get Away from Pressure and Demands of Beach with Brief Vacation to White House. As it's fair to say here that the leader of the free world isn't really sending out a reassuring message. All of this as tensions are rising internationally, especially between Russia, North Korea, and the future President of the United States that says that, hey, we spoke to Russia. Russia is saying, no, you didn't. Yet, as the situation in Ukraine just took a turn for the worst for Ukrainians, and we will be going into a full deep dive into that current situation, how it's unfolding, and the future of it, as it's going to be a very difficult situation for Donald Trump to, of course, deal with. This, as his political opponent has cheerleaded on, of course, continuing the path towards essentially World War III, is the path that she had us on, as now one of her aides is literally coming out and saying that Joe Biden should resign so she could still be the 47th president of the United States. As of course, there's no love affair between Joe and the, I won't say it here, family-friendly show, and I don't think that's going to happen here, as of course, Kamala Harris literally plowed through $1 billion, way more than Donald Trump had, and still somehow ended up in $20 million of debt. As of course, a lot of the celebrities that endorsed her and officially supported her, they didn't do it for cheap. They did it for tunes of millions of dollars, as of course Oprah was asking Americans to defend the Constitution as she was defending her pocketbook, as she was getting paid heavily to be an absolute shill for the corporatist establishment candidate that luckily lost. As the majority of Americans rejected her vision of America, and especially her foreign policy, which is absolutely crazy, as now we're going to try a different form of government, a less intrusive form of government, and in some places, no government at all, which is music to my ears, as Donald Trump has just announced the end of the Department of Education.
And one other thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children because they'll do a much better job of it. You can't do worse. We spend more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, and yet we're absolutely at the bottom. We're one of the worst. So you can't do worse. We're going to end education coming out of Washington, D.C. We're going to close it up, all those buildings all over the place, and you have people that in many cases hate our children. We're going to send it all back to the states. Thank you very much.
Yeah, as of course, that is beautiful. It is music to my ears, as he is keeping his campaign promises and even going above and beyond them in many instances, specifically with also the recent ousting of neocon Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo from his future administration. Things couldn't be going any better for America, as Donald Trump just announced a new border czar, Tom Homan, who is his former acting ICE director, who already previously had major clashes with AOC that were absolutely brilliant to see, as he's known for firebrand statements like this.
In January of 25, the greatest president of my lifetime walking back in the White House. He tells me we got, I say 120 days. He says, no, you got 60 to lock the border down. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what I told the president. He comes back, I come back, we fix it.
Well, but how do you really feel there, Tom? So, of course, he didn't hold anything back. And these are the policies that a lot of Americans voted for, that a lot of them were shamed for previously believing, endorsing, as this is the new norm, as potentially we might also see an Alex Jones White House press secretary, which would be absolutely incredible and awesome to see, as there's a lot of fun things in the play here, but one of the things that isn't fun is dealing with the larger untangling of what some people have already described as the start of World War III. And I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but major institutions like the Washington Post are even writing major op-ed pieces saying this is already the start of it, as we've been on this particular YouTube channel warning you about this situation for many years on end now. You look at the beginning, I'm saying, hey, we're on a trajectory for war with Russia. Hey, there's going to be more proxy conflicts. Hey, look what's happening here. And we've been right all along. You go back to all the other videos and we told you the larger storm clouds that were brewing, and we predicted that forecast with absolutely crazy accuracy. And if you appreciate it, support us on SaveLukeNow.com, as we are in some financial and legal troubles, as I got a letter that literally just shocked the utter crap out of me a couple of weeks ago. It's not fun to deal with, as the IRS said, hey, here's a $180,000 bill, deal with it. And now we're kind of left with a very perplexing and confusing situation. And instead of just asking for a handout, we made 100 limited edition hats that you could exclusively only get on SaveLukeNow.com. I will personally sign them for you. We're selling them at a premium. We're selling them at about $50 a pop. That should be enough to cover a retainer for a lawyer. And then, of course, we will be fighting this and figuring this out, and hopefully still surviving and sustaining ourselves as an independent media organization. Otherwise, there's very rough times ahead of us that might essentially take us out. One of the best things you could do is also just become a member of LukeUnfiltered.com, which, of course, gives you exclusive videos about becoming the best, strongest, most amazing version of yourself, as, of course, we prioritize a lot of really important information just centered about you being able to act on all the information that I have garnered for you for over 20 plus years. There's master classes, there's the ability to call into our live show, there's the ability to really take part in some really awesome stuff, all exclusively on LukeUnfiltered.com. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, sign up for it right now, as of course a lot of people are expecting things to go very peachy, very clean, very easy for Donald Trump, but I don't forecast that type of situation myself with all of my in-depth research and analysis into all of this, as of course yesterday we got the news headline that Trump was urging Vladimir Putin to avoid escalations in Ukraine. All of this according to a report from the Washington Post, and again, corporate media, anonymous sources, you don't know who to believe, but they are the news network of the intelligentsia, and it wouldn't surprise me if they, of course, were getting information from intel sources that were potentially even bugging or spying on the next president of the United States. Or they could have just gotten an anonymous source. Again, we don't know, because a lot of this is anonymous, as the two allegedly discussed Europe's sizable military presence in Europe, as Trump was seeking to, quote, have a swift revolution to the conflict, which the Russians are heavily invested in, as allegedly Donald Trump told Vladimir Putin not to escalate situations any further from here. All of this as Biden's national security advisor is literally coming out and saying that they want to put Ukraine in the strongest position possible for negotiations for them to continue this war before Donald Trump steps into political office. The Guardian had a very similar article, as today the Kremlin is actually dismissing reports that Trump and Putin actually spoke, as they're calling this, quote, pure fiction. Now, did they talk? Well, according to the Russians, no. According to the anonymous sources of the Washington Post, yeah. Who are you going to believe here? That is up to you. As Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that no call has taken place between Putin and Trump so far. This, as of course, Donald Trump did speak to Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, this past Wednesday, as Trump's administration, even according to The Telegraph, has no place for war hawks, signaling that, of course, the policies around Donald Trump and, according to his campaign promises, will be moving forward towards a resolution towards this conflict, whether the Russians or the Ukrainians like it or not, as there are going to be some very tough negotiations ahead, as the British broadcasting company is literally talking about how Trump should focus on peace, not territory, as it's going to be important to note here that the Ukrainians probably will be giving up some of their previously held land. As the Wall Street Journal also has a very interesting article detailing how the Russian-Ukraine war is intensifying right now, as the number of drones that are flying up, the number of foreign troops and record losses are surging, as the Russians are particularly advancing on many portions of the Donbass region of Ukraine, as they have recently taken 2 major Ukrainian towns, and they are advancing at their fastest pace in a year. As of course, after Donald Trump won, a lot of the vigor of a lot of these soldiers is pretty much gone, because why should you fight for something that's going to be ended in just a few days from now? Why should you risk your own life for something that you know is not going to continue? There's going to be an end to this, and why not just try to save face and try to make it to the end of this without losing your life? As of course, that's the morale of a lot of the soldiers right now that really, on the Ukrainian side, probably aren't that motivated to fight, as the Ukrainians also face a major desertion problem, as the Russians now have amassed 50,000 Russians and North Korean troops as they are planning major attacks, specifically launching major counteroffensives in the Kursk region, where, of course, there is expected to be a lot of fighting in the future. Now, how much territory and land will the Ukrainians lose here? Well, of course, time will tell, but the battles are intensifying. It is becoming very untimely for the Ukrainians that are just trying to, of course, hold on, as they are the smaller country with a lot less resources, a lot less manpower, as the Russians have been making a lot of advances in the Donbass region for a very long time now, with a slow crawl kind of offensive that has been able to allow them to gain more significant territory in the region. Now, this Kursk kind of offensive here is going to be something to look at here, because will the Ukrainians be able to hold this off? And what situation will they be in, especially when Donald Trump becomes the president of the United States? And what kind of negotiation leverage will they have? All of this as the Russians have, of course, extended their political ties to North Korea, Iran. They're offering a lot of African countries total support, as they are also galvanizing a lot of natural resources, and in some instances even taking it away from the French that rely on African resources for their nuclear power. That, of course, is being denied to them as the situation gets very complex internationally. Now, all of this is happening at a key time, as it looks like there's more and more rifts specifically happening between NATO and the United States, as there are alleged reports online right now that the NATO secretary is threatening to expel the United States from NATO. As we know, the threats are coming from both sides of the aisle now, as, of course, the vice president under Donald Trump is now coming out and saying that the United States could drop support for NATO if Europe specifically tries to regulate and censor Twitter on social media. All of this as Europe is specifically looking at all the free speech we're having here in the Overton window being opened, saying, no, we don't like that. And as we know, bureaucrats don't like transparency, accountability, and of course, people being able to figure things out for themselves. And this is why there have been a lot of regulatory pressures on Twitter that now finally are being pushed back on by the future administration of the United States that's saying, hey, don't mess with our companies. Don't try to destroy free speech. Allow us to actually, of course, operate here in a clear, honest, and real way. And, of course, you should at least be doing that when, of course, the United States is financing the bill for NATO in such a very heavy, significant way, as a lot of the funding in Ukraine is directly funded by America. NATO and all these European countries are giving very little, as Donald Trump previously even stated, hey, you guys want this war? You guys could pay for it as well. You guys could even match us. As it's fair to say that this future administration won't be going in that direction, as they're even specifically calling for an end for this particular conflict, as even MSNBC's Joe Scarborough admitted that Trump was tough on Russia in his first administration. He probably will be tough on them again, and there's a lot of leverage here, and there's a lot that the liberals are trying to continue in a very unfair, very bastardized way that no longer is flying and resonating with the American public. Now, how will Donald Trump deal with this situation when Vladimir Putin has a lot of the leverage here? He has a lot of the territory that he has taken over. It looks like he's going to be taking over more territory. He now has his war machine ramped up, ready to go. He has a lot of other countries like North Korea and Iran depending on him now, as of course they just now extended their military and political ties together, as well as their economic ties. What will it take to, of course, slow down Vladimir Putin and the steamroller that, of course, he's putting down on a lot of the Ukrainian territory that he's taking for himself? Well, that's going to be a very tough situation for, of course, the Ukrainians that I feel absolutely awful about. I feel absolutely horrible for, as, of course, a lot of these people have lost their lives, specifically young Slavic men, and looking back at it for what? As there were deliberate efforts by the West to specifically stop any kind of peace from happening in the region. Any kind of larger resolution, any kind of potential easing of this conflict and the fighting, specifically had individuals like Boris Johnson literally flying into Ukraine and usurping and stopping immediately. What were they fighting for? Why did this continue? And what will Donald Trump have to do to bring peace in this region, which is essential? Because again, if you look at Ukraine, it has a lot to do with Asia. It has a lot to do now with the Middle East. It is the proxy conflict between the West and the East. It is the clash of civilizations. It is this larger kind of key battleground that, of course, is expanding to many other parts of the world right now. If you're able to, of course, stop that major conflict, stop that major life loss, you will have, I think, one of the most significant political victories of our time. And I hope Donald Trump is able to achieve it. And with the people that he's surrounding himself with, I think there's a big chance he does. What will have to happen here? Well, let's be honest here. The Ukrainians probably will have to give up a lot of their territory. There probably will be a buffer zone at least set up. There probably will be concessions, and Ukraine probably will have to say that they will no longer be joining NATO or the European Union. There will have to be some trade allowed, probably with Russia, as of course, let's just be honest here, and I'm not saying this from a biased perspective here, looking at the current situation, looking at the battles, looking at the desertion specifically in Ukraine, looking at the 50,000 North Korean and Russian troops that are coming in the Kursk region right now, looking at the slow roll of just conquest that the Russians are having in the Donbass region. The Russians are at the key position to negotiate here, and I hope there's going to be some kind of larger peace deal that, of course, the Ukrainians and the Russians will both be happy and unhappy about. That's the key of negotiations. Coming to the table, giving a little, gaining a little, but also coming to a compromise and willing to, of course, lose some in order to, of course, prevent World War III. And if you think that's a good idea, share this video with your friends and family members. It is more imperative than ever. We return. Something has happened. It's almost as if an algorithm was just kind of taken away that was underhanded against us. If you look at our videos, they're doing amazing. So share these videos with your friends and family members. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you guys doing that. We return 6 p.m. Eastern with Dr. Simon Gudik, and we're going to have someone else also here in studio with us for a very special live broadcast, 6 p.m. Eastern, all here exclusively on youtube.com/wearechange. SaveLukeNow.com. I need your help. Love you guys. Stay tuned for more.